Hello world, welcome to the 225th Climate Change Emergency Protest here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm in front of the Eisenhower tree, which is dedicated for Dwight D. Eisenhower, who is a tank commander here. On these grounds, believe it or not, they had a Camp Colt here, which was a tank facility on the battlefield back in 1918. And then he became President of the United States in 1953. He was a commander, overall Allied commander for World War II and the invasion of Normandy, and he changed the course of history. As far as the president goes, he probably his biggest thing that he did to this day is one of the biggest things is that he was the person who got our interstate highway system going after he saw the Autobahn in Germany. And that's why we have all these massive highways around the United States, for better or worse. I mean, it does allow a lot more trade and convenience thereof, but it also was the beginning of the death knell of trains and streetcars and things like that. So it has its ups and downs. You know, everything affects everything in different ways, and you just don't know how things are going to spin out of control. So the automobile industry made out, but the climate has evidently suffered immensely. So as you can tell, this is the, and you're also looking at General Meade up here on the hill right here, that statue there. He was in charge of the Battle of Gettysburg, and when Robert E. Lee attacked from this direction, all the way across 3/4 of a mile up to that hill, uphill into a defensive position, the Union Army destroyed the Confederates at that point. They had them on the ropes, and the Confederates left this battlefield the night of July 3rd, sorry, and retreated back towards the Potomac River. The Union troops could have easily have cut them off at the choke points, Point of Rocks or wherever they crossed the Potomac River, or Harper's Ferry, and they could have easily choked them off and ended the northern part of the northern Army of Virginia, and that would have allowed the Union to focus on the rest of the armies of the Confederacy. This would have changed the course of history had Meade done his job and pursued the South, but he did not. So that's why we had what we had for another 2 years of killing for the South, for the Civil War, and it was detrimental and very devastating for everyone. So speaking of detrimental and devastating, this is called Doomsday Clock. I wrote this up. This is in regards to the atomic scientists that have determined that we have 90 seconds to midnight for survivable, in order to survive. That's how close we are to Doomsday right now. And we're not paying heed to it. Nothing's being done. The media is not covering it. This is the closest Doomsday Clock has ever been since atomic scientists developed it. And we're literally as close to Doomsday as we have ever been. That's saying something, because I've lived through the age of nuclear weapons and things like that, and I was pretty sure when I was a kid that we were going to die of nuclear strike. And now it's becoming even more evident. That's one of the three legs, and I talked about that previously in other episodes of these climate change talks. So right now everyone's all up in arms about TikTok and the spying and everything on the cell phones. But this is the TikTok they should be concerned about, and it's the, hold on, I call it TikTok. I developed this myself. It's the International Climate Change Table of Catastrophe, the McHenry scale. And I wrote up this whole thing as to level of catastrophe, and we're encountering that right now. The United Nations says we're 1.1 degrees above where we were back in 1880 Celsius. That would be a catastrophe level of 2, but my thinking is we're well beyond that. We're up to 1.6 if we use a 1750 baseline. I'll talk about that in a minute, which is 64 times the level of catastrophes that we had before. I see it as a doubling for every 1/10 of a degree, and I guarantee you that eventually this will catch on. No one might acknowledge it, but that's what's happening right now. Every 1/10 of a degree, you can count on a doubling of catastrophe throughout the world as far as climate change goes. So that's where we are right now, and that's the Table of Catastrophe. It's the International Climate Change Table of Catastrophe, TikTok. Okay, so that was my development, and if you steal it, that's up to you. But you got to acknowledge that I actually came up with the idea. So let's get to page 1, is what I was talking about. Okay, so right now, this is the 225th Climate Change Emergency Protest, and I'm here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This is March 24th, 2023, and right now, This is protest number 225, and then next week will be number 226. That'll be on March 31st, 2023. As I said, I talked about the tick-tock clock and 90 seconds to midnight, where we are with, as far as the catastrophe and everything that's coming our way if we don't get straightened out. So Congress and the media don't cover it at all. They're not focusing. They don't talk about climate change at all. I mean, it's utterly, it blows my mind. So the IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came up with their final sixth report, which is a synergy, synopsis, and a summary of the previous reports. So in order to have this report come out, all the nations have to agree to it. So right away, you're into the lowest common denominator as to what you're allowed to say. So if several countries are involved, what you end up with is a watered down effect for the whole report. So that means the countries in the middle of climate change right now, they're going like, oh my God, don't you see what's happening? We're being flooded and burned out, and all sorts of things are happening to us. And don't you see this catastrophe unfolding? But no, they're not allowed to report that in this sixth report. It has to be a watered down level that people like United States or China or whatever go, no, we can't say that. It'll upset the economy too much. So the report is kind of like really mealy mouth, and it's already out of date as soon as they even start watering it down. It's not true to what is happening at this point. So those in the middle, must surely be heavily burdened with the fact that of despair. They know no help is coming right now until the big nations suffer immensely. And we're suffering here in the United States. And I was watching hail and all sorts of flooding going on in China. Who knows what's happening in Russia because no reports are coming out. But the United States right now, the entire West is just being decimated as far as snow and rain and things like that. And I'm telling you, if this rain gets down into slip faults, we're going to end up with a giant earthquake. And it's not a good situation that's developing right now. They're having floods. They've gone from total drought now to total floods. And they're on their 12th, as the media calls it, their atmospheric river. Rather than saying this is just a continuation of bizarre weather patterns that now happen when you have climate change. Anything can happen. And that's because the jet stream is shredded and you get these Rossby waves throughout the whole globe. And you could be in a heat wave, you could be in a cold wave, you could be in flooding, you could be in anything. You name it, anything can happen. So, the thing about it all, though, is we're ignoring these other nations that are suffering immensely. And eventually that's going to be us, whether in China, Russia, United States, India, wherever. And India's suffering as well. But, it's eventually going to be us. And that's all there is to it. So right now we have to really worry about what's coming, and it is coming sooner or later. Either it's coming this year or next year. It's going to be a super El Nino. The oceans are warmer than they've ever been. Sunspots, man, these cars. I'm on the Gettysburg Road anyway. There's fences here and everything, and that's where the Confederates tried to cross, and they got decimated by the Union. Anyhow, that's why it's all busy. So right now we're going to have a super El Nino coming up, and that's a venting of the heat from the oceans. Also, at the same time right now, if you look at my Facebook page, I put a picture of the sun up, and the sunspots are increasing now, meaning the activity of the sun is increasing, meaning it's going to send off more photons our way, meaning the temperatures are going to start spiking somewhat, as opposed to cooling off when there are no sunspots. So the combination of sunspots and the super El Ninos could end up being devastating. Feedback loops that could happen from this. One of the first ones you're going to start seeing is a permafrost is going to start thawing or melting, and it's going to start venting off more and more carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane into the atmosphere. So with the El Nino, temperatures could easily spike, 0.3 degrees Celsius, maybe more. I don't know. I mean, this is going to be a huge El Nino when it comes. It should be, at least. So what that means is you're approaching a level where you get these feedback loops that are uncontrollable, and things get worse and worse and worse, and there's no getting back from it. We're really running the razor's edge, if not have gripped onto the last remnants of the extinction cliff, or we've already been pushed off due to our inadequacy about tackling climate change. So when the El Nino finally goes away in a year or 2 years or whatever, or 6 months, what will happen is the La Ninas tend to get hotter and hotter as compared to the previous level where they were. It's a new plateau. So like right now, the La Ninas are hotter than the previous, not this last one in 2016, but the previous El Ninos. So the places where it's supposed to be cooler the floor has risen up, and it keeps rising higher and higher. So it's a really dangerous situation. Now, one thing to consider, and everyone keeps touting nuclear energy, is that there are 93 reactors in the United States on 55 sites. 28 states have nuclear facilities on them, and the average age is 40 years. They're 40 years old. These things are getting antiquated, and they need to be dealt with, and no one's dealing with them, and they think they can just keep going on and using it. And the half-life of uranium is just some ridiculous hundreds of thousands of years. And if you do a half-life of uranium, it's still radioactive for another half-life. So it takes forever and longer than probably the Earth has been here to really get it down to nothing. So worldwide, there are 439 reactors in 30 countries. So the question comes to be, when climate change really starts kicking in earnest, will the scientists and the lab workers at the nuclear facilities go back to work, or will they try to save their families instead? I guarantee it's going to be saving their families. So no one's going to be manning the nuclear facilities, especially if life on Earth gets wiped out or humans get to the point where they can't get to facilities or people don't have the knowledge. So you got all these nuclear radioactive bombs, basically. They're not going to blow up. They'll melt down and then just spew radioactivity everywhere. And with 439 reactors throughout the world, you're going to have radioactive Earth, okay? So even if humans, sort of survive, there aren't people to maintain the facilities. And what it will do is finally wipe out what remnants of life there is on Earth. Or people will just learn to live with, fingers growing out of their heads and things like that, all sorts of mutations. So carbon dioxide right now is 2.5 points higher than last year. Everyone keeps saying in the media, oh, we're starting to get it under control. No, carbon dioxide keeps going up and up and up. Now the question is this natural? Is this due to feedback loops, which is dangerous? Or is it man-made and we're just blowing through and not paying attention to anything? Right now, China last year produced the equivalent of 2 coal plants per week. They brought online 2 coal plants per week. I mean, that's insanity. And then, speaking of insanity, Joe Biden authorized the Willow Project up in Alaska. Look it up. I talked about it last week and the week before, which is equal to up to 200 coal plants coming online over 30 years. So this is insanity as far as so-called leaders who aren't leading. They're pushing us over the extinction cliff. Nobody's noticing. Everyone is so worried about their little political parties winning and losing rather than looking at their loved ones, their husbands, their wives, their brothers, their sisters, their sons and daughters, and going, we're really risking their lives and we're not paying attention to what's happening, and we're not good citizens when we allow that to happen and leave the politicians to control us. So the international IPCC, the UN body, keeps targeting 1.5. We can make it to 1.5, then we can get things under control, keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, they keep saying we're at 1.1 degrees Celsius. There's an argument with that, and they're moving the baseline, and it doesn't matter at this point. I'll tell you why. I'll point out both sides here. Okay. 1.1 degrees Celsius, if you accept that number, then we're having all these catastrophes around the world right now. By 1.5 degrees Celsius, things will spin out of control because of the McHenry chart, the table of catastrophe. And 4 points higher will just be unfathomable. You can have a doubling of the catastrophes going on, and it's going to be an Earth we don't recognize. Okay, that's if we accept their 1.1. My contention is we passed 1.5 several years ago, and that's why we're seeing all these catastrophes right now. It's just basically connect the dots, okay? We're seeing the catastrophes. Obviously, the baseline is a lie that the IPCC and the news media keep saying. If we use the 1750, the year 1750 as a baseline for the start of the industrial era, which was because this happened in 1863. How can you not be in the industrial era until 1880 when this already happened 17 years earlier with cannons and cannon shot and mechanized killing and things like that? So obviously 1880 is not the start of the industrial era, and it is 1750, the year 1750. So anyways, so we passed the 1.5 baseline several years ago, and that's why we're seeing all this. So, this idea of when you hear this 1.5, we got to keep everything under 1.5, forget it. You're not going to survive 1.5. your life will be turned over to the point you won't recognize as to what's happening. And then they're saying, oh, we'll probably approach 2 degrees, even 2.5 degrees Celsius. Who can survive that? This is insanity what's happening. You're going to have a social breakdown, government collapses all around the world, and whatever you can think the worst things about human beings amongst the best, but most likely the worst will occur. Everyone will be out for their own survival, their own tribe, their own friends, their own family, whatever it takes to survive. And they're going to leave people behind. This won't be a raise all boats situation. So right now is the last gasp we have. You know, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, said, we're skating on thin ice. This is the last chance we have. We've already had the last chance we've had. Now we've got to really scramble to get back to where we need to be. And they're doing pie in the sky things, saying, oh, we can do this, we can get it. No, right now we can't do this. There's no leadership. Everyone is a psychopath that's in charge of the governments throughout the world, and especially here in the United States. And I'm not just talking the president, who's in my own mind psychopathic, but also Congress. They're not talking about what's happening. They're subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and that is straight up murder, suicide for our country and for the world. They have no intention of helping out with renewables and getting that online with research and development. So, you know, you can be all shocked at my saying, oh, your parties are murderous suicide groups, but they are. You know, what do you call it when you're on a path to extinction and death? A certain death is coming, and no one's doing anything about it. You really have to get out of yourself and start looking at your friends and family and what's happening around the planet right now, and get off the 3 media programs, CBS, NBC, and ABC, and also Fox Television, who's a total denialist group, and start looking on YouTube and researching as to what's happening. Go to Haystacks News. Go to YouTube and type in climate change. Go to my talks. I've got 224 other of these going on. Go to Environmental Coffee House, Paul Beckwith, Peter Carter, even Guy McPherson. You know, he had crazy stuff initially that came out, and now it's looking like it's more real than not. So the media is not honest as to what's happening. They're not inquisitive as to why events are happening. They'll tell you what happened, such as a severe rainstorm and a storm of the century, storm of 1,000 years, storm of 5,000 years, storm of the last 20 years. We've never had it this bad. I've never seen anything like this. You know, there's a reason behind it, and they're not asking who, what, when, where, why. You know, you're supposed to ask that when you're doing news programs. That was my thing when I was a kid. That's what media always was supposed to ask: who, what, when, where, and why. You know, so they're not reporting the consequences of inaction either. They don't have any experts coming in, and real experts. And I don't mean these celebrity experts coming in. I mean real experts to tell you is, okay, if we continue on this path, this is what's going to happen. This is a guaranteed thing. There's a man in prison right now in Britain, Roger Hallam, and he shouldn't be in prison. All he did was step out and talk about climate change, and he really violated no laws at all, and they've got him in prison right now in England, and it's a crock of crap as to what's happening. There's also Julian Assange. Politicians, okay, so, you know, right now you got the president and Congress. They're not talking about the urgency needed or the dire situation we're in or the existential threat. You know, we had dinner with a friend, and he said, oh, Joe Biden's talking about climate change all the time. He is not. Okay, I've heard him talk about it maybe twice, 3 times in the middle of a paragraph that was 1 sentence long. Okay, that is not doing something about climate change. You're in a dire situation, which is worse than all the wars that ever happened in the history of humanity. Do you understand this? This situation is worse than all the wars that ever happened in the history of humanity. And we give a blurb, maybe once every year or so, and talk about it. This is craziness that's going on. These people in charge are psychopathic. And you have to admit that something is really wrong with the situation right now with the United States and the world in general. So next time you see a basketball game on the news, or celebrities, you know, being covered, or feel-good topics, just realize they're not covering climate change at the time. The real news is what's going to happen. This will be a part of your life for the rest of your life, whatever's left of it. But you're never going to get away from this again. Okay, this is as good as it's ever going to get. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And until we turn around and face the problem, we're not going to address the problem and take on the problem. So ignoring it is self-indulgence, but it's not going to get the job done. So realize your politicians are not being asked or demanded a question as to what they're doing and why is there no action being taken concerning climate change. They're not reporting about climate change truthfully, and what they're doing, basically, the news media, if you noticed it. And probably don't know it because you're in the middle of it, watching them and believing in them. They're just regurgitating what the governments of the world, and especially here in the United States, are issuing and saying to them is, this is what the news is, this is what the news is. And they can't think for themselves. And it's like, if you're a journalism in college, you have all these pie in the sky, I'm going to do this research and expose stuff. No, you're not. You're going to go work for a corporation such as ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox Television, and you're just going to become a cog in the machine. Until you're ready to go independent like Chris Hedges or Russell Brand or Jimmy Dore or whoever else, you're doing nothing, okay? You're accomplishing nothing. You're just regurgitating blah of what the politicians want you to say or what your owner wants you to say. You're not an independent person. So right now the bottom line is this, and this is truth. You know, these talks just drive me crazy. I hate doing this, but this is what has to be said because no one else is saying it. Okay, this is the truth. Stay on this path. We're going to die. Okay, all of us and all life on Earth will die. Okay, this is where we're headed right now. This is not some exaggeration or anything like that. Do the extrapolations as to how things used to be 10 years ago, how they are now, and they're going to get exponentially worse, doubling effect. And you look at that as to where we're headed and doubling and doubling and doubling. And by the time you get to supposed the 1.5 degrees, 0.4 degrees higher than now, you won't recognize what's happening. So this death won't be pretty either. You're not going to just, wake up and go, I think I'm dying today, and then just roll over and die. No. What's most likely going to happen is going to be some sort of cataclysmic, heart-wrenching thing that you're going to experience with your friends and family as to what's going to happen. Isn't it better to avoid this situation and get off this path and demand that your politicians get us off this path and start? If they don't want to do anything, then don't take our money, don't take our taxes. Just forget it. We're not going to pay anything for you. Their responsibility is the mutual assured responsibility is that we give our taxes, they make informed decisions and make good decisions about preserving our lives and protecting us, and they're not doing that. So right now you're going to experience what we're headed towards, a cataclysmic upheaval as to what we have come to love and cherish. It'll leave us in a gut-wrenching, soul-sucking realization that not only did we fail, we failed the future generations. And what's worse about all of this is that we did not even try. When you're self-indulgent and not even trying, that's the biggest sin there is. You don't care about your children or the next generations coming. And it's a murderous, mortal sin, and it's a mortal sin of self-absorption. It's the worst of all things you can do. It's just so self-important, and I don't want to change my life, and we got to keep on this way, and I don't care what happens to anyone else. I've actually heard relatives say, I'll be dead by then, I don't care. I mean, are you serious? I mean, Jesus, that's horrible to say. So hopefully you'll join me next week for number 226. This is number 225. I know it's a hard one, but you got to hear that kind of stuff, okay? So I'll catch you next week. And thanks for hanging in there. See ya.